Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with reference recording. And this is a particularly interesting one as regards the discography of the work in question. The work in question is Dvořák's Violin Concerto. Now, the interesting thing about Dvořák's Violin Concerto is that until rather recently, it wasn't considered a great work that's in play that would have a reference recording. It wasn't. Dvořák was known for his cello concerto. He wasn't really considered a concerto composer. He only wrote three completed ones. He wrote an earlier cello concerto that wasn't orchestrated. But there's the piano concerto, the violin concerto, and the cello concerto. Everybody adores the cello concerto. No one much cared about the other two until the past couple of decades. And that's what's so fascinating. Now, there were always violinists who did the Dvořák Violin Concerto. Most famously, Nathan Milstein recorded it back in the 50s or something, but it was in stereo. Not many others were interested in the work, which is a terrible shame because it is a fabulous concerto, one of the great romantic violin concertos, and one of the most beautifully proportioned works formally that anybody wrote for the instrument. Really, it's an amazingly lovely piece. The problem was it had a terrible reputation. It had a terrible reputation because Dvořák wrote it for Josef Joachim, the dedicatee of the Bruch Concerto and the Brahms Concerto and all that stuff. And Joachim refused to play it. And everybody was telling Dvořák he didn't understand anything about form, that the first movement needed a big opening thing like a classical concerto, and it needed to be worked out more, and it shouldn't just end and segue into the slow movement. All of that stuff makes a perfect concerto, about 30 minutes long, in perfectly equal length movements, with a finale, which was usually the worst part of any romantic concerto, that was not a letdown. That was like one of the high points. It was just such a beautiful work. But that didn't make any difference. And so many violinists, as a result, just ignored it. Heifetz never did it. And, some of the other famous guys, they just didn't do it. So that left the field open for the, reference recording. The only people who did it were Czech violinists. Specifically, Josef Suk, who is Dvořák's great-grandson. And he made two gorgeous recordings of it. One with Václav Neumann and this one with Karel Ančerl. Now, this one with Ančerl was kind of legendary. People talked about it, but they didn't hear it. It wasn't easy to get, although it was on Supraphon records. And it wasn't until Supraphon had international distribution in the past, 30 years or so, 40 years maybe. They started to become available, I think, in the 1980s, widely available. And then when compact discs happened, they made compact discs rather early on in the game. And I knew them, so I know this for a fact, how they finally started to get international distribution through Qualiton imports and some of these other importers and things around the world, and this stuff came out. Then they did a big Czech Philharmonic edition, which is where this one is coming from. Then they did a Karel Ančerl edition. And so these recordings of the Dvořák Violin Concerto with Suk were widely available internationally, and they immediately became the reference recordings because, first of all, they're fabulous, and second of all, they have a provenance which is unbeatable, and thirdly, they actually were available, and everybody was able to listen to them and determine which ones were, going to be the best. Now, soon after these came out, and these things started to pop up on various sound carrier media, the Dvořák concertos, both the piano and the violin concertos, became a big deal again. And the reason they became a big deal again is because back in the 80s and 90s, when the record labels were going crazy recording everything, especially after compact discs popped up, everyone was looking for repertoire that was less known by major composers. And so you have these two sensational concertos by Dvořák, one of the great composers, that were as good as ignored. So a lot of violinists, instead of doing yet another Brahms or yet another something, or who were looking for couplings for the extra length of CDs, you needed to have 70 minutes or more of music. So you could have two big concertos on a CD instead of one. They thought, aha, this Dvořák concerto is sitting out there. Why don't we do that? And so they all started recording the Dvořák Violin Concerto, and a lot of pianists started doing the Dvořák Piano Concerto, and they re-entered the basic repertoire, at least as far as the discography is concerned. And that meant that we all needed to have comparisons when we were, as critics. I mean, because remember, the consensus is there's a critical consensus, and there's what people could actually get their hands on and buy, and there's, the excellence of the performance. Those are sort of the three criteria that go into a reference recording. So we critics who are looking for, what do we compare this new stuff to? Well, the logical comparison is to the classic recording of the past, historically. It's stereo. I mean, a good recording. And of course, here it was, Ančerl and Josef doing this, or with Neumann, one or the other. But Ančerl is generally regarded as sort of like the one. And this was issued in a couple editions, of the Ančerl Gold edition, and in this edition, I think it was twice. But anyway, the bottom line was we needed a standard comparison, an excellent performance that we could use to evaluate all of these new recordings that were coming out. And so this was the one. And it achieved its consensus rather late in the day, because this was recorded in 1964. And for much of that time, it was completely unavailable in the West. And the work wasn't a player. It wasn't being considered. But at the time that it was, well, here it was, sitting there in very good sound, by the way, and sounding marvelous and fabulously played. And so that's one way a late consensus emerged, compared to when the thing was actually recorded, because it was available and because so many other people recorded it, and we all wanted to go back to a generally safe and reliable and excellent consensus choice. And there it is, the consensus for the Dvořák Violin Concerto. Interesting story, though, isn't it? Again, all of these are a little bit different as regards how the discography operated historically, and what was available, and what people said, and what they could do about it. And I just find this fascinating. That's because I'm a record critic. This has been my career for the past 40 some odd years. It's just endlessly interesting to see the way that recordings are disseminated and received and acquire their reputation. And I hope you're enjoying these videos as much as I enjoy making them, because I just think that the stories behind these recordings are really, really interesting. So there you go. The Dvořák Violin Concerto has acquired reference status in this performance. So keep on listening, friends, and thanks for joining me. Take care.